So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. It's great to see you all here today. My name is Abbey Gingras. I work at News Revenue Hub, and so I'm really excited to talk to you about how to maximize the upcoming election in November for your audience and membership goals. And please feel free to utilize the chat throughout today if you have questions. We'll also have time at the end for questions, but feel free to drop them there throughout, and I will try to pause and read them as we go through just to make sure I don't miss anything. So just a quick introduction about the Hub. The News Revenue Hub is a mission-driven nonprofit that helps newsrooms create reader revenue and try to make them become more sustainable. So we provide technology as well as consulting services to newsrooms on audience and membership efforts. And since 2016, we've worked with over 70 newsrooms to help raise more than $60 million. And I know many of the news organizations here today are ones that we have worked with. So I'm very excited to see you in this context as well. Christina, I know you're here today. Would you like to speak to this slide, or would you like me to cover it? All right, I think I will cover it then. So we have a new product rolling out called News Revenue Engine. Hopefully some of you were able to attend our demo last week, where we were able to run through what the engine looks like. It's going to be a tool that will help you process donations, provide reporting, receipts, and more. And it's going to be available for NewsMatch participants. So if you're interested in learning more about this tool and using it for NewsMatch, we're going to drop some links in the chat that you can use to learn more information and sign up to get alerts about this tool as NewsMatch approaches. And just a little bit more about me before we dive in. Like I said, my name is Abbey. For some of you that came late, I am the Director of Consulting at News Revenue Hub. Again, I work with many newsrooms, both hyper local and national and everywhere in between on their audience and membership efforts. Before I worked at News Revenue Hub, I was an editor at Outside Magazine on their audience team. So I was involved in all of our digital strategy efforts there, from newsletters to social media, to optimizing our homepage for engagement, and also led our SEO strategies. That was a big task that I was a leader on the team. And before that, I worked in local news as a reporter and a fact checker. So I've held the editorial role as well, and have worn many hats like many of you here today. And I'm just always really focused on what audiences want and how we can better serve them. At the end of the day, we're all here for our audiences, for our communities, and providing them with information and just helping improve their lives. So that's really what it comes down for me at the end of the day. Anytime I'm giving a recommendation about social or search or anything like that, I'm always thinking about, how can we best serve those audiences? So on our agenda for today, first, we're going to take that high level view, of course, of why elections are so important. Many of us already know that they're important, but beyond just like the editorial implications, they are so critical for growing our audiences, for fostering loyalty with the audiences that we already have, and driving membership or revenue from those audiences. Then we're going to talk a little bit about what we can do before Election Day to make our lives easier when Election Day rolls around, but also to improve our work for our readers. So we're going to talk about what we can do in August, September, and October to really maximize the election season for everything that we can get out of it. Then we're going to talk a little bit about tools that you can use to make that work as easy and as streamlined as possible for your newsroom. And then, of course, as you know, Election Day is not the end. In many ways, Election Day is the beginning of this work. You will have new laws in your community. You might have new members of your city council or of your state government with different agendas maybe than previous administrations. And so Election Day is really just the beginning of how we serve our communities and cover things that come about from elections. And so we'll talk a little bit about what you can do post-Election Day to really keep that momentum going and to continue to foster loyalty in your audience and drive revenue. And then, of course, we'll have time at the end for questions if you have any about any of this subject matter. So why are we talking about Election Day in August? It's about 2.5 months away, which in journalism time feels like years. And many of you today probably have a million things on your plate. And so Election Day might just seem like something that you don't need to worry about now. You have other responsibilities to tackle between now and then. But I really encourage you to start thinking about this now or even earlier for future elections, because the more planning and groundwork you do earlier, the easier the actual election period becomes for you and your team, and the more you get out of it and the more your readers get out of it. So just doing some work now, just a few benefits of that. Election week will be much less of a scramble. You'll still probably be pulling some late nights, I'm sure, but hopefully it becomes a little bit less burdensome than it has been in years past. Overall, again, we're thinking about our audiences. If we put in effort and time now, you're going to create better products for your audience, which is really what it's all about at the end of the day. But then, of course, there are more benefits for you and your newsrooms. So putting in content and time and effort now will increase your traffic for August, September, and October. You have all the more time to build loyalty and habit around your election coverage. And you have more time to build revenue. So all of those are great things. And I like to think about our coverage the way you think about your bank account accruing interest. You can deposit money later in your account, and yeah, that money is still there, but the earlier you put it in, the more interest you're going to gain. So it only benefits you to just put that time in as early as you can. So what can you do before November? There are many things on the audience and revenue front that you can do between now and Election Day. And I know there's a lot of information on this slide. We're going to break it down month by month on the upcoming slides. But this is just to show you that you can kind of add a few tasks to every month, and you don't need to do it all at once. You can really break it down and make it very manageable and digestible for you and your team to accomplish. And you have 2.5 months. So even just committing maybe an hour, 2 hours a week to some election planning between now and then, that's really not that much time, but you can accomplish so much with that time. So we're going to talk about some of the things that you could use with that 1-2 hours a week dedicated to this effort. So let's look at these phases a little bit more closely. So we're in August, we're pretty far away. And the number one thing I would encourage you to do right now is to look at your evergreen content. Hopefully you were able to attend our session in July with my colleague Samantha about evergreen content. And so I hope that you've already been digging in your archive and have found some evergreen content that you can utilize. But I'm specifically talking about election evergreen content. So if you go back to 2020 or previous election cycles for your community, do you have any evergreen content that is still applicable today? This top example is from the Connecticut Mirror, how to vote in person or absentee on Election Day. This was from their 2020 coverage, but I would assume it's still pretty relevant to 2022 voting. So this is an example of an article that they don't need to write a new version of this per se for this year. They can just update this article if anything has changed in their state and then re-promote it for their readers. So if you have existing evergreen content like this, definitely utilize it and save yourself the work of writing it all over again. And if you don't have this type of evergreen content, you can write this content now. And in future election years, you can write it beginning of summer, you could write it in the spring. You could really publish this kind of content at any time. And so I encourage you, if you need it, to start producing it now when things are a little bit slower before the election season sneaks up on you. Next, what I would encourage you to do is to review the search trends from your primary in your search console. So if you live in a state like I do, you may not have your primary yet. And so this might be a future to do once you have a primary, but many states have already had theirs. And so you can go and look in your data and see which articles your readers were most interested in from your primary coverage. You can see which races they were most invested in, or maybe which candidates they were the most curious about. And those trends will likely carry over into the general election in November. So I encourage you to look at those and kind of note what issues were people interested in and how were they searching for those? What names were people looking for? Were they looking for the name of your county or your city? If you have a bill that has a nickname, were people searching for the nickname of that bill, or were they searching for the actual name? Little things like that you can pick up on can help inform how you tackle your election coverage, and also, what words you use in your headlines, maybe like what articles you choose to put at the top of your newsletters. All sorts of things can be informed by what happened during your primary. So I really encourage you to spend some time digging into that data for your own audience. And then last but not least, we love utilizing our email list. It's our best way to communicate directly with our really highly engaged readers. So if you do have some extra time and bandwidth on your team, I really encourage you to plan something special for your email list. I am working with a few newsrooms who are going to be doing either like pop-up newsletters or special edition sends of their regular newsletter tied to the election. So that can be a very low lift. It could be a bigger lift. Really depends on what you have the capacity for. But I encourage you to do something with your email list beyond your typical newsletter, even if it's just one extra send, maybe the day of the election or the day after, just something special to show readers that like extra effort that you've put into your election coverage is a great way to utilize that. And you might be able to do some of that planning and even some of the writing well in advance if there's some evergreen content that you can include in that newsletter. So moving on to September, we are approaching the election a little bit more closely. And so there are more things that we can do just to work ahead and make our lives easier. So first and foremost, we're going to continue reviewing and updating content that you already have that is still relevant and will continue to be relevant up until Election Day. So now we're talking about, of course, evergreen content, but we're also talking about maybe content that's evergreen just for this election cycle. So candidate profiles, summaries of different issues that are on the ballot, things like that, that won't really change between now and Election Day. Those are all great things to be publishing early and just keeping fresh until Election Day. And then, of course, any news articles that you're posting too, you want to make sure that readers are able to find those things. Alongside that, if you haven't done this already, I really encourage you to create some sort of elections page on your website that you can point your readers to, where they can find all of the election coverage that you're producing in one place. So this example to the right here is from the folks at Bridge, Michigan. They created this 2022 election landing page that curates all of their election content in one place. They link to it from their homepage, from their header, and it's really easy as a reader to go onto their site and easily find all of their election coverage. So that's a great way to just like give readers a hub that they can go to find whatever it is that they care about. And then last but not least, we can't talk about our audience without talking about social media, because so many of our readers and audience members are on social. So I really encourage you early to start thinking about some sort of special social media strategy for election week. You might look at your existing social strategy and see what do you want to do the same and what might you want to add extra effort to. So one thing, for instance, that I've worked on with one of my other newsrooms, we noticed during the primary that they got an influx of traffic to their election articles from Twitter. Twitter was normally a lower traffic source for them, but during elections, they saw that it was a bigger source, which makes a lot of sense. If you think about the users that are on Twitter, they're usually politics wonks, journalist types, or people that are really dialed into those communities. And so it makes sense that election coverage would resonate really well there. So that might be something where you don't spend a lot of time on Twitter normally, but maybe during the election cycle, you do. Maybe you put in some extra effort, send extra tweets, things like that, just to try to maximize the platform and get the most out of it that you can. I included this tweet at the top from Wyophile because I think it's a great example of a few things that I would really encourage newsrooms to do on Twitter during election periods. So first, you can see the timestamp. This was tweeted out on election night. They had someone working and manually posting on social on their primary nights. That's great. I think most newsrooms are doing that, but really encourage you to have someone manning your social accounts that night, not only to post, but also to field reader questions that are sure to be coming in as results roll in. Another thing they did here that I really like is that they were quote tweeted their reporter Maggie, and so they were promoting Maggie's work, driving readers to Maggie's page, where she was posting more frequently and more detailed than the main account was. So that's a great way to just elevate more of the work that you're doing by utilizing as many accounts as you can. You'll also see that Maggie included the hashtag #WhyLedge in her tweet. So that's an existing hashtag for any sort of Wyoming politics coverage. Maggie and Wildfile likely knew that anyone in Wyoming who's following the primary would be looking at that hashtag for information and results. So it's a great way to just get your tweet or your tweets in front of a bigger audience. Hopefully politics followers in Wyoming were already following Wildfile, but if they weren't, this is a great way to introduce them to this organization. And last but not least, I also wanted to note that both Maggie's tweet and Wildfile's tweet, you'll note, don't have links to Wildfile's website. That might seem counterintuitive on the surface because, of course, we want to drive readers to our websites. But it's actually increasingly been shown that on Twitter and Facebook, posts with links perform worse with the algorithm than posts without links. So that's not to say that you shouldn't do link posts on social accounts. You absolutely should. But that is to say that if you aren't utilizing just text tweets or text with image tweets, that is a strategy that you should consider, especially for something like an election results night where you can just be tweeting out updates. You may not have a story up on your site yet. So don't discredit, just posting without links. That's still really great for engagement and impressions for your organization. Sorry about that. I clicked the link. All right. So on to October. We are now very close to Election Day. So what are the last few things that you can take care of before the election to just really get all your ducks in a row? You're probably already thinking about this, at least if you're on an editorial team, but finalizing your election work plan and schedule. I found that this is something that newsrooms are generally really great at and have dialed in because there is just an ongoing organizational system for how election nights play out with reporters and editors, who's going to what results parties, who's staying back in the newsroom and catching story information from reporters as they're sending it in. That part of the work schedule is usually quite dialed. But what I do often see is that that system is only for the editorial team, and it doesn't include folks like audience editors or membership managers, digital producers, just like anyone that's sort of like in the newsroom orbit, but maybe doesn't have a distinctly editorial role. So I really encourage you to sit down with that plan and make sure that everyone is included because we all have a role to play when it comes to elections. And the better you can be working together, again, you're just gonna have a better end result. And there's no reason that like your audience editor can't be in communication with your reporters. Your membership manager can't be like, hey, I'm gonna send out this fundraising email at this time. Does that conflict with a newsletter? All those sorts of considerations. If it's not finalized yet, October is definitely when you want to finalize your social media and your newsletter strategy for election week. Just make sure you know who is going to be doing what, how many posts you're expecting to create, how many newsletters you're going to send out. The sooner you can have that planned out, then the sooner people can do this next suggestion, which is to start pre-writing copy for anywhere that pre-writing copy could apply. So again, this is something that newsrooms typically do for stories, but may not be applying to other areas of their election plans. So we all know that newsrooms typically write like early drafts or starters of stories for different outcomes of races. So you might have like 4 drafts of a story that's like candidate A wins in a landslide, candidate A wins in a close race, candidate B wins in a close race, or candidate B wins in a landslide. So typically those kinds of drafts exist, and maybe the one that's like the most likely result is more written out so that when the race is called, you can just get that story published. But again, a lot of people aren't doing that for social posts, for newsletter copy or newsletter subject lines, for headlines, for calls to action on your site. All of those are things that you can also do pre-writing for. And so even if you can't use the exact, Facebook status that you wrote out early, maybe you can use 90% of it and just save yourself a little bit of extra work on election night. And again, then you don't have to think of those ideas in the moment when it's late at night and you're tired. You can use your brainstorming power now and in the upcoming weeks, so that copy is like as strong and optimized as it can possibly be, because you're just going to get better results if you put more time into that copy early on. And then last but not least, we want to make sure that we are updating our calls to action on our site. So when I say calls to action, I'm talking about newsletter sign-up boxes like this one on the right from the city, or donation calls to action as well. So this example from the city is like their standard newsletter sign-up call to action that's on their site right now. It's pretty basic. It just tells you, sign up for our daily newsletter. It's coming in the morning. You can subscribe. So they don't need to change this drastically for the election. You could just tweak the copy ever so slightly to indicate that you can get the latest election news in your inbox each morning, or you can get the latest politics news, just something that tweaks the copy a little bit and points readers that maybe are new to your site to say, hey, we're covering this regularly. If you want to get those stories sent straight to you, you can sign up for our newsletter. Or, on the donation front, if you read an article about from our election coverage and you thought it was useful, please consider donating so that we can cover these issues beyond election day. So just making sure that you put a little bit of time and customization into your calls to action as election day approaches, so that those fields are unique and custom for that period of time. So just a few tools I want to highlight that your newsroom may already be using, probably has access to if you're not using, or if you aren't using and you don't currently have access to them, they are free or low cost, and will really help aid this work and any work going forward. So probably first and foremost, I really recommend using some sort of project management tool that allows your whole team to collaborate, to see various projects or tasks within a project and see where they stand, and like what tasks are waiting with which team members. So I personally have used Trello and Airtable for this before, and I think they're both pretty user-friendly. They have free versions that you can use, but there are other tools as well, like Asana or Notion, that you can use. And I'm sure there are many others out there. These tools are increasingly popular. So if you've never used one of these, this might be a good chance to try one out. They're really great for just keeping work visible and like keeping everything on track when there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of deadlines. Relatedly, a specialized Slack channel is also a really great option. It could either be a supplement to a project management tool, or maybe it's what you use if you aren't interested in introducing a new tool to your team at this point. But if you're using Slack or some sort of communication platform, I really encourage a special short-term channel. It's like Elections 2022, where everyone on your team can post any sort of election brainstorms, any questions, concerns. It can just be all that communication housed in one place. And I encourage this because I found that if you don't have this, what happens is that these conversations are happening in a million different places that are often isolated. So, an editor might be DMing an audience editor at the same time, a reporter is DMing that audience editor, and that conversation could just be happening in one place and would save everyone a lot of time and a lot of extra messages. So really encourage having that like public shared space where those conversations can happen. And because you're just going to get a better result when that's the case, because if you're doing a brainstorm in a DM with one other person, you're missing out on a chance for another member of your team to come in with an amazing idea that the two of you might never come up with on your own. So I think it's always great to include as many voices as you possibly can. Next, we've already talked about this, but Google Trends and Search Console are both really great, powerful, free tools. You can look at the data from your primary, again, if that's happened already, or if it hasn't, once it does, or from previous election cycles. Obviously, 2020 was a little bit of a weird year because it was a presidential year, but you can look back at even older periods than that if you would like. You can also look just in like the last few weeks at what trends are happening in your area, because issues will evolve. I'm sure earlier this summer, abortion access was probably really high, but today with the Biden administration's announcement, maybe student loan forgiveness is like the top trending issue. And so that stuff will evolve regularly. So just keeping an eye on trends as much as you can. And then last but not least, utilizing the tools within your own CMS. You probably have a tagging system where you can tag your stories if they are about transportation or politics, justice, health, all those sorts of things. I encourage you to first have an evergreen tag, so you can tag any story that's evergreen as such. That will make finding those stories much easier for you when the next election rolls around. And then you can also, again, tag stories maybe with like 2022 election or something, so that those stories can all feed into one place. So I showed you earlier that Bridge, Michigan 2022 election landing page, and that was one that they created manually. This one on the right here from Spotlight PA is a page that's created by that tag in their CMS. So when they tag a story with elections, it gets fed into this elections tag page, and they can easily use this without adding any extra effort or time onto anyone's plate, but they can still curate all their election coverage here, and they can promote this tag page if they want to, add it to their homepage, things like that. So you can use this option without having to create like a new custom landing page if that's something that you just don't have the time and bandwidth to do. Over on the left, I really will always highlight this anytime I'm talking about search or search trends, but this is a screenshot from Google Trends newsletter. I highly encourage that you sign up for it. I have the link here and we'll send this out afterwards, but it's a free newsletter. It comes every single day and it just curates the trending topics of the day for you. So you don't have to go to Google Trends or remember to go look up trends. It's just sending them to you so you can passively observe and see if there's anything that's relevant for your newsroom. The caveat here is that this newsletter is for anyone around the world. And so usually the trends are for the whole United States or even global trends, but they do often have sections within this newsletter that are more localized. If there is like a big breaking news story, or if there's some news event happening that Google opts to include localized trends for. So this is a screenshot from the primary election day in Wyoming, and that issue of the newsletter had a whole section on search trends related to the primary in Wyoming. And it was like, this is so amazing and actionable for any newsroom in Wyoming. They can see what issues people are caring about in their state. They can see what questions people are asking. And there's probably a dozen story ideas just in this screenshot for a newsroom in Wyoming. And so this is just something to keep in mind. It won't always be applicable to your newsroom, but every once in a while it will be. And when it is, you're going to be really happy that you're subscribed and that you have that data delivered to you. So highly encourage signing up for that if you haven't already. So of course, we don't want to stop just on election day. You did all of that work. You did excellent planning. Your election day coverage was a huge success. Hopefully you saw increased subscribers to your newsletter list. Hopefully you saw an increase in donations, an increase in traffic. Everything went exactly as you hoped it would go. But now it's the day after the election and you're thinking, what do I do now? And so we don't want to just let this momentum go because there is a lot at stake after election day that we want to make sure that we are accounting for. So on the membership and revenue front, of course, I'm going to tell you to fundraise off of your election coverage. So you can do this before election day, with the tagline of like, help us fund our election coverage. Or you can do this after election day, to say like, we want to continue doing this type of reporting. Please support us. And I hope that you will do both. I hope you'll fundraise before, during, and after election day, and just really maximize that week of the election. We are lucky that it falls during the NewsMatch period, so you will be eligible for matches for gifts during that period. And this year's NewsMatch toolkit is going to include some extra emails specifically for elections. And so you're going to have templates at your disposal that you can use to make fundraising around the election a little bit lighter of a lift for your team. So I definitely encourage you to make use of those and just make sure you don't let this opportunity slip past without fundraising while you have so much reader engagement and attention on your efforts. And then, of course, once you get people to donate to you or to provide revenue for you, you want to make sure that you are stewarding those people. Oftentimes, what we see during elections is that there's an influx of donations, but many are one-time donations. And so we do want to make sure that we engage those folks and try to keep them on as donors past the 1-year mark. We hope that they continue to see the value in what you do and will stay on as donors for future years. So I encourage you to steward them as soon as you possibly can. So this example over here on the right, both of these emails are from the folks at Montana Free Press. They did a great election campaign around the 2020 election. They sent out multiple fundraising emails leading up to and after election day. And then almost immediately after the election, they had coordinated and planned a members only event to analyze what comes next after election day. And so they got a ton of donations from their fundraising drive, and then they immediately provided a benefit for those members through this event that they created for them. So you don't necessarily have to do an event, but just some sort of stewardship effort, even if it's just a customized, personalized thank you, can go a long way to making those donors feel like their gift had a real impact on your newsroom. And then on the audience front, of course, we just want to continue to pay attention to what people cared about during this election cycle. So what candidates or offices were they most interested in? What issues were they most interested in? You have that data from your coverage. And so pay attention to it and don't let it fall off your radar. It seems obvious to say, pay attention to what readers care about and then cover those issues and tell readers or your audience that you're covering those issues. But it bears repeating that is like a foolproof strategy. Your readers and your audience will tell you what they care about. So just make sure you're giving those issues the care and attention that they deserve, and letting your audience know what you are doing related to those issues, so that they know that you are on top of them. You also will probably see an influx in newsletter subscribers during this period. Again, similar to donations, a lot of times we see one-time donations during elections. A lot of times we will see people subscribe to our newsletters, maybe with the intention of like unsubscribing after the election. They just want to be clued in for the short term. But we want to try to keep them on our lists and engage them because, as you all know, politics and these issues aren't only relevant during the election period. In fact, probably the most critical things in your community are happening, in like February or March of a non-election year, because that's when things are happening in your local or state governments. So just be prepared to shepherd those newsletter subscribers. Hopefully you have like an automated welcome series ready to go that will just steward them as soon as they join your list. But you may also want to do, again, some personalized outreach to try to keep those folks engaged and on your list well past election day. And then for future elections, we always want to make work easier for our future selves or for people that come after us in our newsrooms. So I encourage you to do a little bit of housekeeping work, both leading up to your election and after the election, to make that job that much easier for you in the future. So hopefully you produce some evergreen stories, and you can keep track of those, again, maybe using a tag in your CMS so that no one has to do it after the fact. Just keep track of those evergreen stories. So the next time an election cycle rolls around, it's like, what did we publish 2 years ago? And you're like, oh, I have that list right here. It's ready to go. These stories we can, re-promote on our homepage. These ones need updates. It's just going to make your life so much easier. And then you don't have to store that information in your brain. And then, of course, we just want to log what worked, and also what didn't. I think this is a step that we often skip in journalism, because we are so heads down and doing the work. And as soon as an election ends, we're just on to the next news effort. But it really is worthwhile to take a pause, maybe schedule a retrospective with your entire team where you just spend an hour, 2 hours on a Friday in December, and just say like, okay, what worked from all the plans that we implemented and executed? What did readers really seem to like? What made our lives easier that we want to do in future years? And on the other side, what didn't work? What was like a big flop? What was like, we didn't plan for this issue that arose and it made things really complicated. Any of those takeaways are so, so valuable for future elections. So I really encourage you to take that pause after Election Day and just do that retrospective and log those details in a Google Doc, save them somewhere so that when the next election rolls around, you can learn from your mistakes and also from your wins, and just make the next time around that much better, both for your team and for your audience. And I think this example over on the left from the Mississippi Today team is just a really great example of paying attention to your audience and just like getting that feedback from them. So they have Mississippi Today Listens. They post articles where they answer reader questions, and they also have a survey on their site asking readers to tell them what issues they care most about. And this can directly impact, how they are covering these issues, how much time and resources they're dedicating to these issues. Even like, what story might be good to lead a newsletter. If it's one that people really care about, that story might be like the subject line of the newsletter rather than put at the bottom. So really getting that reader feedback is great, but also making sure you take that second step and using their feedback to guide your decisions and your investments in the future will just go that much further to show your audience that you are participating in a feedback loop with them, and that you're not just pushing content at them, but that you're really listening and implementing the things that they tell you are important to them. So that is all I have for you today. We have plenty of time for questions. If you have them, please drop them in the chat. Just real quick, I do have office hours up on the INN website. So if you don't have a question now, or you don't want to ask in front of the group, sign up for my office hours or just shoot me an email directly. I'm always happy to talk about this stuff one-on-one. And the next session we have coming up is in mid-September with my colleague, Will. He is going to be talking about how to make the most of major giving days like Giving Tuesday, to just maximize the dollars that you can get on those really important fundraising days. Thank you for dropping that link in the chat. Let's see, Jennifer, can you share more examples of election-themed campaign appeals? Did you say you're sharing the slides? Yes, I will share the slides, and I can also send some examples of different election appeals. I know that was a small screenshot, so I can include some links to actual emails. I can send you that whole Montana Free Press campaign, and a few others if you're interested in those. Yeah, no problem. Yes, definitely sign up for Will's training. It's going to be great. Very excited about it. Lisa, I think you mentioned not putting links in tweets. Can you reiterate and explain more about that, please? Yeah, so you can still definitely, I am not saying don't ever post links as tweets. You can and you should. We are trying to drive folks to our websites. But with Meta's algorithm changes on Facebook and Twitter's algorithm changes, both platforms are increasingly interested in keeping users on the platform. So they don't want you to link because that would take someone off of Twitter and to your website or to another website. And they're interested in keeping folks, on Twitter, on Facebook for as long as possible, which is their prerogative because that's how they make money. And so the algorithms have changed such that if you have a post on Twitter without a link, it tends to get much more engagement than a post with a link. So there are, of course, exceptions to that rule. It doesn't mean every post without a link is going to be a viral hit. It doesn't mean every post with the link is not going to get engagement, but it is a tool that I think newsrooms don't utilize as much. We're often just posting tweets with links and nothing else. So it's just a reminder that you can do tweets without links. You could do a whole Twitter thread where there's only a link in the last tweet of the thread rather than in every single tweet. So it's just another tool and a reminder that you can drive meaningful engagement on Twitter without necessarily linking out to your website. Any other questions? All right. Well, like I said, we will be sending out this recording. We'll also send out the deck with all the links in it. And I will round up those example election appeals emails, and we can send those out to you all as well. And like I said earlier, the NewsMatch toolkit this year will include some extra elections themed appeals. So encourage you to make use of those as well, because they'll be a great way to maximize that early NewsMatch period at the beginning of November. And if you do have any other questions, again, you have my email, I have office hours. I'm more than happy to talk in more detail about any of this with you one-on-one or with your team. Oh, Lisa asked, when does the NewsMatch toolkit come out? Do you want to speak to that?
Yep, so that'll be released by early October, and we'll have some additional training around how to best utilize that and everything like that. So you'll have more information definitely to come. All right, thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.